according to an article in the Sydney Morning Herald over the weekend, almost 60% of births at some Sydney private hospitals are by caesarean, as more women seek to control childbirth. Mary Ward writes that this comes within the context of increased discussions around traumatic experiences of labour. First thing I thought was maternal age. So we know that maternal age is going up, and with increased maternal age comes the increased likelihood of a caesarean.
So it's 60% in some of these private hospitals in Sydney. What's the average sort of across the country?
It's 1 in 3.
So it's closer to 30%.
Yeah.
Right, so
more
this is
broadly.
double.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the maternal age does not fully explain the trend. A recent report found that it is elective, not emergency C-sections that are driving the trend. And concerns have been raised about private obstetricians pushing women towards getting a C-section for the convenience of the obstetrician, because obviously they can then schedule it and they can go, all right, I know that I'll be here. I know that there'll be a bed. I know I can staff for that.
And this isn't entirely new, is it? Because I remember the phrase too posh to push was thrown around, 10, 15 years ago about the idea of elective C-sections. And I don't know if I've imagined this, but I think actually Posh Spice, it might have come around when she said she was having an elective caesarean, and this phrase too posh to push started to be thrown around.
I mean, I detest that phrase because I used to host the podcast, The Delivery Room, and I did Hello Bump, where I spoke to a lot of people about their birth stories. And there is nothing posh or easy about a caesarean, and any woman who's had one will know that.
There's no easy way to give birth. Let's just get that clear. And we should say at the start of this segment, we have no judgment. However your baby comes into the world, through the sunroof, through the garage, through adoption, through a surrogate,
you do you.
We also have zero medical expertise, and we're not looking to give people advice.
Exactly. But what's actually interesting, what you're saying about the too posh to push, is that I read this fascinating article in The Guardian about Brazil and caesarean rates. So they have the highest in the world, right? And there are some private hospitals in Brazil where the rates are as close to 99%.
What?
Across the population, it's about 57%. But there is actually this almost class distinction in Brazil where they understand it as C-sections are modern and elegant. And this whole article was about C-sections as status symbol. The author wrote, natural birth is something poor women are meant to endure. And I wondered if reading this just about the distinction between private and public, I kind of went, is this indicative of a broader cultural trend where we go, the poor women will have the long natural?
Let's pause on that because I think that's part of what's going on here as well. I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, I got in an elevator and there was a woman in the elevator who I hadn't met before. We were just people riding an elevator together. And she turned to me and she said, "Are you going to have a natural birth?"
Oh, my God.
I didn't even understand what she meant. And then once it dawned on me that she actually did mean a vaginal birth, I thought, how crazy is it that we are still categorizing some births as natural and some as presumably unnatural? And this idea that you can plan out how your birth is going to go is, I think, part of the issue
Or
here.
that it's any of their business, how you're going to do it.
Isn't it about this increasing move towards birth as identity?
Yes.
Yes and no, right? Because there was an inquiry in New South Wales last year that I think is a piece of this puzzle, and it was an inquiry into birth trauma. It was the largest of its kind, and thousands of women spoke about what had happened to them. And you couldn't listen to that or read some of those accounts and not be deeply moved and troubled by what some women have experienced in hospitals. And I reckon that it's having the result of doing two things. The first is people going, I want to take the medicalisation of childbirth out of it. I want to go home and I want to have a midwife come to my home and do it. And I totally understand how you're getting to that position. And the other one is I want full control. I don't want this 48-hour labour with tears and stitches
that
and
could
stuff
have started
and
any time.
Forceps and exactly right. I don't want that. And so I can see that people are going both ways. Do you think birth trauma is being a big part of this story here?
I've got so many thoughts about this. And again, not minimising what anyone wants to call anything that's happened to them, but I think that the use of the word trauma now that sort of permeates every negative experience makes this a really difficult conversation to have, because there are very few women who would say, my birth was great. My second birth, I would say, was traumatic. When you look at it on paper, nothing terrible happened except that I really wanted pain medication and there was no anaesthetist available, so I wasn't able to have it. I delivered vaginally. Everything was fine, but I felt very traumatized because the birth that I thought I was going to have, which was that I would get drugs like I did with my first and my third, that didn't happen. I nearly had a cesarean the third time, an elective cesarean, because I was so, I'll say traumatized, but you can't compare what happened to me to someone who had a stillbirth, someone who had, an emergency cesarean. I've got friends who had truly medically traumatic births.
I don't think that trauma is about comparison or grading it, though. Like, I think that I think there's space for acknowledging.
There's no leaderboard?
There's no leaderboard.
I would be on the bottom of the leaderboard.
But even so,
trauma.
I think that there are so many women, not just now, but throughout history. I'm sure that my grandmother, who had 7 babies, would have experienced birth trauma. There was no language for it. It was something no one cared about. She just disappeared and came back with another baby. And she lived with complications that no one ever cared about.
And isn't it great that we are now so much more open and able to share our experiences about something that until as recently as 20, 25 years ago, a lot of the time male partners were not even coming into the room for birth. It was regarded as so secret and so shameful in itself. And I think it's great that we're opening up discussion about that. That said, Mia, you mentioned that part of the reason why your second birth was traumatic, or experienced as trauma, was because it didn't live up to your expectations. I worry that in fetishizing birth stories, we are teaching women who have never been through this before that it is something that they can control or that they can narrativize, that they can turn into a neat story, when often it isn't that way, and often we don't have any control over it. Jessie, I know you really love birth stories. Can you explain to me why?
Obsessed with birth stories. I listen to them all the time, and I think I am in awe of women. I'm in awe of what we endure and go through. And the thing about birth is that there are so many twists and turns. Like, there are so many plot points to people's birth stories, and no two are ever the same. And I can say that as someone who has listened to thousands. Like, it blows my mind what women go through. And I do think that there's utility in it. Like, I immersed myself in education. I was kind of the millennial test case of...
Do you think that was helpful?
Yeah, and aren't you, by immersing yourself in birth stories, aren't you again sort of already projecting what your birth story is going to be, how you're going to narrativize it, when in reality
birth is content.
It's not a story, yeah.
I don't even mean content that you post about it, but just like we think of everything that happens to us as content or narrative.
And you can't help but therefore set up certain expectations about how it's going to go.
I felt prepared. I felt like I did somewhat know what to expect. I felt like every stage I knew what I was in, and I had what I now look back on as a great birth. And I had people say this to me when I was pregnant. I had an absolute pathological fear of childbirth that I actually had to speak to a psychologist about because I was so scared.
Okay, stop you right there.
Yeah.
Connected, do you think?
Well, isn't it funny that when I was pregnant and I immersed myself in all this stuff, I came out less scared?
But you just said when you were pregnant, you were pathologically scared. You also were pretty depressed, but we don't know what that's related to. But what impact do you think, looking back now, knowing all of that, like the internet almost gives us too much access to too much information.
Yeah, and I was told this by a lot of women during pregnancy. They said, you don't listen to the whole positive birth story. Like, in terms of the person on TikTok telling it, like, we are attracted to the negative, scary stories.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, I really appreciated people during pregnancy telling me their positive ones. And I really think that we should tell more and more positive ones, because most of them, I had a midwife say to me, the standard birth would make terrible television and a terrible movie, because the standard birth is actually a lot of boring sitting around.
Okay, but I'm going to say something controversial. You said it taught you what to expect. Well, maybe it shouldn't have, because you can't know what to expect. And the idea that the more preparation I do, the better prepared I will be. There is no preparation that you can do for a lot of birth outcomes.
And you would have had the same birth if you were prepared or not, no?
I felt like I had, because remember I made Hello Bump during that time and I'd also done the delivery room.
Yeah.
I felt like I had strategies. And I don't mean like if necessarily like a foolproof thing, but for each stage I felt like whether it was breathing or whether it was a TENS machine, I felt as though the information and the knowledge was power for me in that instance. I really
felt
did.
That it gave you some aspect of control.
Yeah. And what I would say about this, and maybe the reason I'm interested in it, is that I was the woman who went to my obstetrician and said, all right, elective C-section. That's what I want. Book me in. And
why did you do that?
Because I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I definitely have a thing about control and pain. I knew that I had a past trauma involving pain and I had very sound psychological reason why the elective C-section would be best for me. And very gently, this obstetrician said, I've been doing this for a long time. Think about it. If you want your elective C-section at 8 months, absolutely we're going to go for it. But just think about it. And I am so glad, and this is so specific to me, this is not a tale that I am telling so that other people do it, but I'm really glad that I gave the vaginal option a go and that went well for me. My sister did the same thing. She ended up with birth trauma. So you absolutely can't control it.
So don't you think it's all about hindsight? Not about whatever you do, like you get what you get.
What I do think is worth acknowledging is that elective C-sections, and I find it in some of the rhetoric and how people talk about it, is just never the easy way out. Like I know a lot of people
there is no easy way out.
Yeah, who the idea that by doing it vaginally, it's harder and more unpredictable. Like this idea of a binary, that there's one where you're more in control and where you have your proper date and all of that. I think that's a false binary. And
I
probably
also reject the idea that one is morally superior or makes you more of a woman or is a preferred experience. I find that
that one is natural and one isn't.
And if this is a corrective to listening to what women want, great. Yeah. I think that that's probably been missing since the beginning of time.
We just have to hope now that, you pointed out that this is a class-based phenomenon in some ways. So, people are now listening to a certain segment of women who want what they want, but it would be nice if we extended that to others.
I wonder also, how much of it do you think is that we have absolutely no tolerance for unpredictability anymore? For example, if my phone rings and it's an unknown number, firstly, I'm shocked that my phone's rung because who would ring me? And secondly, I'm not going to answer it. I don't know who's there. I need to control that. Like it's the same reason I wouldn't just ring either of you. I'd text you to say, can I ring you? So that the ringing wasn't a surprise.
Is it about our tolerance or is it because we suddenly can? Like I wonder if this option was afforded to women 100 years ago.
I just think the idea of you not being able, it's like everything I want to watch is on demand. Everything I want to listen to is on demand. There is no unpredictability in our life. We can find out if we're having a boy or a girl. We can name the baby before. We can have a party. We can do all of those things. So the idea of just when might the baby come? Who knows? How might the baby come? Who knows?
Feels countercultural.
And I think that when you say that, I think there's an element there of sort of judging people wanting to get under their control.
Oh no, not at all. I would probably be the same.
Right. Okay. Because I was going to connect it to so not the judgment that you are conveying, but the judgment around GLP-1s is similar. It's like you're not losing weight the natural way now. You're taking a drug for it. It's the easy way out. It feels like a very similar discourse.
And people used to say that, about weight loss surgery as well. And there was all this stigma and people didn't want to say that they'd had it because it was the idea that you've done it the easy way.
And maybe to Jessie's point, it's just that it's available now when it wasn't available before.
The information discussed in this podcast is general in nature and is provided for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice, diagnosis or treatment and should not be relied upon as such. Always seek the guidance of your doctor or qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding your health or a medical condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you've heard in this podcast.